Our topic for today is the morality of consent. Throughout the course of the semester, we've discussed a range of cases that put pressure on the idea that consent is the only basis for moral judgment. I'd like to put to you a case to begin our discussion about the morality of consent, a case involving surrogate motherhood. In the 1980s, there was a famous court case in the United States involving paid pregnancy or surrogate motherhood. A professional couple wanted a baby but couldn't have one on their own, at least not without medical risk to the woman. So they made an arrangement with a surrogate mother. They hired a woman. The woman's name was Mary Beth Whitehead. They agreed to pay her $10,000 and all medical expenses to be inseminated with the father's sperm, to carry the child to birth, and then to turn it over to the couple. She agreed. They all signed a contract. Then, when the baby was born, Mary Beth Whitehead changed her mind. She decided she wanted to keep the baby, not turn it over. She hadn't collected the money yet. That was payable upon delivery. And so the case wound up in court. Now, for our first question, I would like to imagine that you are the judge. And as the judge, you are not you don't have a law to apply, let's assume. As the judge, you're trying to decide the right thing to do, morally speaking. How many here at Harvard and in our classrooms around the world, raise your hands if you as the judge would enforce the contract and require Mary Beth to turn over the baby to the couple as provided in the contract. Raise your hand if you would take that position. And how many would not enforce the contract? How many would reject it? All right, so we have a divided opinion, both here at Harvard and also in our classrooms around the world.
My name is Aishani, and I would not enforce the contract on the grounds that the consent that's being given by the woman is not really free consent.
And why is it not free?
Because she would not be in a position to be able to know what she would feel once she gave birth, and therefore would not be in a proper position to be able to judge if she gave, whether she should give the child or not, and I don't think that's free consent.
Who would uphold the contract, and what would you say to Asani's argument that the consent is not truly free in this case? Who here at Harvard has a reply? Those of you who would uphold the contract, what would you say to that argument?
Hi, I'm Graham. I would say that if someone signed a contract without coercion, then under the rule of law, they have to uphold the contract, no matter whether or not their opinions change after the fact.
So even if she changes her mind, she signed, a deal is a deal.
Yeah.
She has to keep it.
As long as she wasn't under the influence of coercion or some kind of forced signature, yeah.
No one held a gun to her head.
Exactly.
She wasn't being coerced. Let's go back to Asani in New Delhi. Grant says so long as there was no coercion, she wasn't forced to sign this contract, it should be upheld. What would you say to that argument of Grant?
There are different things that could be happening. One is the example of the surrogacy that takes place when rich couples want surrogates in poorer countries and therefore end up paying less. In those situations, it is a kind of economic duress. Yes, there isn't a gun to her head. but that could play a factor. Another thing, I would go to the extent of saying that the woman's body should not, or the child itself should not be treated as a commodity that could be bought and sold, like as the case with surrogates.
Grant?
Well, since I'm not a woman, I'm not going to try and argue a woman's rights because that's not my place. However, I will say that given that it's not an international deal, as in it's the same country, same law, because international law is different, if she signed the deal, I mean, law is a law, a contract must be upheld unless there's a clause that she's written in that says she could somehow get out of it after the birth. But if she's agreed to it ahead of time, it's a contract like any other, and that's what I believe.
All right, so Asani actually now has made two arguments. One of them is that the consent is flawed. Grant says, well, no one was holding a gun to Mary Beth's head at the time. But the reply to that, the objection to that argument is, there are other forms of coerced consent, and poverty can be one of them. Maybe she needed the money desperately. And then Asani has made a second argument having to do with not putting women's reproductive capacities, procreative capacities, up for sale, that there's something objectionable to that.
Pastor, my name is Thomas. I think that I would probably give the couple a certain compensation, but I would not try to. I think it's pretty reasonable for us to understand why during the pregnancy the woman would develop certain biological and emotional links to the baby. So I have the tendency to agree with the girl in New Delhi. It is not a regular product that we are talking about.
So you would give the couple something in compensation, but not the baby? What would that be? What would that be?
Probably money or the right to find another surrogate mother without having to paying for it. But that's it.
Grant has argued that a deal is a deal, and that so long as she signed on the dotted line, no gun was held to her head, there was no coercion. Let's take that argument. We've got two arguments. Let's take that argument first. Is there anyone here who disagrees with Grant on that question here at Harvard, and who can address this question of whether the consent may have been flawed in this scenario? Those of you who would not uphold the contract. Yes.
Hi, my name is John. I just think certain things cannot be made the subject of a contract. This brings us back to what we discussed about the guy who wanted to be eaten and who signed a contract, and most people said that's cannibalism, that's just wrong. And I think here, making the baby a product is just not, it should not be allowed just because the mother consented beforehand. So certain things just cannot be made the subjects of economic contracts.
And babies are one of them.
Yes.
So John makes in a way, adds to the second argument that Asani raised, that there is something objectionable to extending contract reasoning or market reasoning to procreation. John, do you see it as a kind of baby selling?
In a way, yes. It's like the kidney market argument. Some people say it's okay, but some other people say it just can't be made the subject of a contract. Just can't be made a product. I see babies just should not be, bought and sold in this case, because essentially the woman is using her reproductive capacity to produce a product. The baby's a product here, and the contract says she has to give it away. I'm not talking about a Marxist alienation of the product from the producer. It's a baby. It's a human being, and the mother should have the right to attend to her child if she wants to.
Okay, so we have a further development of what we're calling the second argument, the commodification argument, we could call it. The first is the consent argument. The second is the commodification argument. John says it's like turning a baby into a commodity. Alsani said it's using the woman's reproductive capacity as a commodity, as a thing, and that's morally objectionable. I would like to turn to Tokyo and Shanghai. On the commodification argument, how persuasive do you find that objection to surrogate motherhood? Is it morally analogous to baby selling or not?
I'm Satoru, and I totally agree with the guy in Harvard, and I strongly believe that a baby is not a product, and even if the mother made a consent that she would sell her baby, and that contract should not be valid in any sense, and it's beyond her. She cannot decide, and she should not be allowed to decide whether she can sell her child in the future. I think so.
So you also, like John, and you see it as baby selling.
Yes.
Let's who does not in Shanghai see that as a persuasive objection? All right. In the front row, just toward the middle, can you tell us why you don't find it a persuasive argument?
Okay, my name's Fan Yan, and I don't think it's a persuasive argument. And the students in Harvard mentioned that it's just like a kidney market, and to illustrate his objection. But I think the woman's reproductive ability is different from the kidney market, and we know that we cannot have another kidney if we sell them, but a woman can reproduce several times, and I think that I think the truth is not the children is not a product, but this contract, the subject of the contract, is done by both sides through their consent. So I think it's not a very persuasive argument.
But in the case of kidney sales, you would be against a free market in kidneys, even though by consent?
Yes, but in the case of the kidney market, that the person cannot have another kidney, and it's irreparable. But like this, but in the case of surrogate mother, I think it's okay.
And what about an open market in baby sales? John here at Harvard compares surrogacy to baby selling. Do you think there should be a free market in babies?
Well, that's a problem. In my opinion, I think that baby sales should be illegal because that baby has their own life and their own conscience, but surrogate is not the same.
I want to take the analogy, the moral analogy to baby selling. Who here at Harvard who would uphold the surrogacy contract has an answer to the baby selling analogy?
I'm Bethany. I don't think you can equate it to baby selling in this case in surrogacy because the woman doesn't have a baby on her own to sell. She has an egg and she has a womb, but she's not selling a fully grown baby because the baby wouldn't exist without Mr. Stern's sperm. So she's not selling a human being, she's selling the capacity for a human being.
She's selling a service.
Yeah.
And Bethany, what do you say to the other part of the commodification argument that says a woman's reproductive capacity should not be up for sale?
I think that's the woman's choice. If she thinks that's not degrading to her, if she makes that conscious decision that she feels that that's morally acceptable to her, why shouldn't she be allowed to use her body that way? If she feels that it's degrading, she should not enter into the contract.
Who has a reply to Bethany? Who does see surrogacy as degrading to women? In Sao Paulo, in the front row.
My name is Andre, and I agree in part with Bethany. I think that it is degrading in a certain aspect, but not because it's a commodification of the service. I think what's at stake here is the bond between mother and child. And that's something worth protecting, and it's not morally contingent. I think it's morally considerable. Therefore, even though it's not a commodification, I don't think the child's properly a thing, something selling. It's properly a service. But the problem is not about the baby, it's about the bond.
Bethany, the bond between the mother and child, Anthony in Sao Paulo says, is diminished or degraded or not really respected if that bond can be subject to a market deal. What do you say?
I think that's a legitimate concern, but I think it should be the woman's choice. I think what's really degrading is to not allow a woman to make decisions about her own body. So to say that because of some abject concept of what the bond between a mother and child should be, should rule what an individual mother wants that bond to be, is what's truly degrading.
What do you say, Anthony, in Sao Paulo?
Well, I say that even though it's possible to make a contract, as was done, if the mother, for some reason, decides that her bond to her child is stronger than the vinculative force of the contract, it shouldn't be considered. The contract should be disconsidered.
But
I say that even though it's important that we are capable to have our own decisions, we are also responsible towards our community and to the person that are related to us, at least in a certain level. And even though I don't think it's my duty to right now define what should be higher or lower, I think it should be considered.
Bethany, shouldn't society make these decisions, these fundamental moral questions?
I think this is a unique situation because society as a whole is not fully concerned. It's women that are concerned. It's not a male decision, it's a female decision. So society as a whole should not be dictating what a portion of society should do. It's not a moral question of something that affects all of society equally. It affects women.
All right. Thank you in Sao Paulo, and thanks, Bethany. I'd like to raise another version of the surrogacy debate, which has now become global. In India, in 2002, the government legalized paid pregnancy or commercial surrogacy in hopes of giving employment opportunities to Indian women who would otherwise have very limited economic opportunities. And so, many people every year now, couples who want a child and who want to hire a surrogate, go to certain towns in India and hire Indian women to carry their children for them. Unlike in the Mary Beth Whitehead case, now they use in vitro fertilization. So the surrogate mother who is hired to carry the pregnancy has not provided the egg, but simply carries the child, gives birth, and then turns it over to the couple who paid. Today in the US, surrogate mothers are paid around $25,000. Counting medical and legal expenses, it's an expensive proposition, sometimes $100,000. In India, it's much less expensive. Indian surrogate mothers are paid $6,000 or $7,000 typically. So let's hear first from those in favor of the policy. Let's Let's start in New Delhi. Can we hear from someone who favors the policy of a global market in paid pregnancy? Who would like to tell us why? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm John. Right. Yeah. And once you admit that surrogacy is valid, then there's no reason as to why you shouldn't outsource it. Because once surrogacy is deemed morally acceptable or permissible, then there's no reason as to why a woman in another country shouldn't be allowed to do it, just because she is from another country.
All right, so if it's morally acceptable in general, then why not have a global market in it, says John. All right. And is there someone in New Delhi who disagrees with John and who has an answer for him? Okay.
Hi, this is Shubro. I would say this is morally impermissible because the very fact that we're going to a different country for a baby means that we're going for a baby which is coming cheaply. So I think certain goods can't be bought and sold in the market, and babies are one of them.
So in New Delhi, the issue of outsourced pregnancy seems simply to depend on whether the practice is or isn't morally acceptable in the first place. If yes, then why not outsource? If no, then it should not be globally traded. Let's hear from someone in Shanghai. What's those who object to outsourced pregnancy, a global market in pregnancy? Is there anyone in Shanghai who would like to address that?
Hi, my name is Ling Li, and I would strongly oppose that because I think some certain function of a human body just cannot be commercialized. And also, I think if you make this market globalized, and why should some women's egg just be priced less than the others? Is it because the people's skin color or their races? So I don't quite support that opinion.
Ling Li says, the very fact that Indian women get $6,000 to be surrogate mothers, and that American women get $20,000 or $25,000 is morally troubling in and of itself, beyond the commodification objections we've been discussing so far. Who's a defender of a market in paid pregnancy here at Harvard who has a reply for Ling Li?
My name's Jay. I would say that in a market, the people who are providing their services have a right to determine how much they're worth. So if a woman in India believes that accepts $6,000 rather than $25,000 to have a pregnancy that would otherwise have been given to someone else, I think that she has the right to accept that deal if she wants to. So
you're in favor, Jay?
Yes.
So that student just means if I feel I'm worth this price, then it's okay. But is there a official or some standardized pricing system for this kind of service? Or if I just admit that I could accept the price of maybe $5,000, but I'm actually just being exploited, it's not that fair, right?
Okay.
I would say that in a market, you don't have a set or standardized price for anything on a level other than the market level. So if the person who's providing the service, the woman who's having the pregnancy, freely chooses to accept a price for her pregnancy, that's her right. So I don't think that it's exploitative as long as there's free choice, and I don't think that in a market there needs to be a set price for anything.
Ling Li?
But that's her right. So is the self-consent as I'm selling my body function that's justifiable to be commercialized? I'm still bothering on this question. I just think it's just not fair that, okay, I want to make this analogy. Then the girl just mentioned it's like a service. I'm selling a service. But what if, just take prostitution as an example. It's also like I'm selling the service and I'm probably using, or I just say, I'm properly using my function of my own body. Is it okay?
Prostitution, Jay.
I would think from the same logic, it's all right. As long as the woman who's selling her services is doing so freely, no one is making her do that, she has the right to use any skills that she has to make money for herself.
So how can those women's rights be protected? Just say, I would rather say, yeah, of course, first I'm a woman, and I will never do those things if I'm not forced to or I have any other choice, right?
And no one is making you, and that's the beautiful thing. I think...
So, if I'm in extreme poverty, I'm not forced by anybody else?
Well, again, that's a situation. I think that as long as there are options other than prostitution for people in extreme poverty, then it's all right. But if that's the only option, then I can understand why that would be coerced.
Initially, it was a debate about price. Isn't there something unfair about unequal prices? And Jay says, well, in a market, there is no fixed price. It's whatever the market will bear, whatever deals people will make, whatever value they place on the goods they exchanged. Faced with that argument, Lingley shifted, by her own admission, back to the underlying objection. She emphasized the coercion objection and offered the analogy of prostitution. And she said no woman really would freely choose to be a prostitute unless coerced, in effect, by the dire poverty of her life, let's say. And so this is back to the issue of consent. Just how free are certain choices that we make under conditions of great pressure, and in particular under conditions of economic pressure, economic necessity. Jay conceded, but only up to a point, saying, well, if the would-be prostitute is so poor that she really has no other alternative, then he sees the force in Lingley's argument. So that was an interesting playing out of the consent objection. Lying in the background is still the commodification objection. How do we know what is intrinsically degrading and therefore should not be bought and sold in the market? Is there a general principle?
Hi, my name is Mariana, and I think the principle would be people's dignity. When you treat a baby like a commodity, you would not respect his rights to dignity.
So Kant did object on grounds of human dignity. That was the heart of his intrinsic objection to commodification. But as we've seen from this discussion, people disagree about how to value goods and social practices, how to value our bodies, how to value our reproductive capacities, how to value bringing babies into the world. And so perhaps there's a philosophical difference between arguments about consent, the coercion objection we discussed, how much inequality undermines freedom of choice, and the second question, how can we know the right way to value goods? And if we disagree about the right way to value goods, how can we, as Bethany argued, how can we make collective decisions about how individual women or citizens should value this or that aspect of their lives? To answer those questions, we have to ask a different kind of question from the question about coercion and consent. We have to ask, is it even possible to reason about competing conceptions of the good, competing conceptions of how to value the good things in life?